Welcome to the Defence Property Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things property investing and real estate for Australian Defence Force personnel. Whether you're looking to build and scale a property portfolio or relocating across Australia, we've got the insights and tips for less stress and more success. Let's dive in.
G'day everyone, it's Liam Garman and Kane, Dury, co-hosts of the Defence Property Podcast. And today, Kane, back in the studio.
Back, yeah, we've had a big month. Down at Avalon for a week, We caught up down there. We're up in Coffs Harbour for the Matlock Memorial game with the Army Rugby League side.
I saw the photos. How was it?
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah.
So we spent 6 days in Coffs, and went out to Belgium for the game on the Saturday. The boys got the win, got the job done, come from behind win, so it was really good. The town really pulls it together, so yeah,
100%.
Keen to go back each year and see more.
You're featuring Discover Buyers Agency was featuring on the jersey, the training jersey.
So we're on the training jerseys and the playing shorts.
Oh, the playing shorts, yeah.
So,
do you have any spares?
Not spares. I've got a few for me, but I reckon I could tee one up for you if you need it.
But see, it's about who you know. It's about who you know. Now, look, Kane, great podcast topic today because it's something that we hear so much of. Our readers are always asking about it, and this is something that you've had to deal with a lot of your clients as well. You know, I see it all the time. Dodgy property groups.
Yeah, they're out there.
They're out there. They're everywhere, and you know, I see it on Instagram all the time. You know, I'll be flicking through reels, and it's guys giving what is actually just really bad financial advice, not being cognizant that, hey, this is people putting their whole livelihoods on the line and giving them bad financial advice.
Yeah. So there's a lot out there that are not just targeting defence, but, you know, they've been around for years, probably spruiklers, like even before the social media influencer and stuff. They were the seminars were the very typical sort of scene for them, sort of in the early 2000s and that. I remember going to one and actually we went in this seminar. The property guy was all, you know, doing his presentation, and then you walk out at the end of the presentation and it's a bit of a mingle, have a drink and have a chat to whoever's there. And there's a broker sitting outside and he's like, sign these blank documents and I'll do the rest, you know. So I think the industry's come a long way since then, especially on the finance side of things, you know, and that's a lot of that sort of stamped out, but they still come across like low valuations and the property group controlling that process, I guess. Yeah,
there's some absolutely shocking stories and just pushing people the wrong direction, you know, and it's very sad. So one thing that, you know, we see all the time and one question that we always get is, how do you identify someone who's rigid-edge, the real deal, versus a dodgy group?
Well, I guess it's who are they acting for? And, you know, typically if someone's selling a brand new house land package or an off-the-plan unit, you know, they're receiving the undisclosed commission from the developer. You know, so they're acting for the best interest of the developer. And they're essentially somewhat a sales agent, really, because they're selling that stock. So they're not advised. There's no advice piece. You know, they're not saying this area over that region for whatever reason. They're purely just selling you stock. You know, so off the plan purchases, houses, units, townhouses, and house and land packages are typically the big screaming red light that you know, they're not acting in your best interest.
So the undisclosed commission is really interesting. I hadn't thought about it. Looking at it from a legal business perspective. Buyers agents versus real estate agents. So for a lot of people that might only be joining us, this might be the first podcast they're listening to on the Defence Property Podcast, but buyers agents are meant to look after the best interest of someone who is buying a property.
Correct, because you're engaged by the buyer. So it's a fee for service and then you act in their best interest. So you take a full brief of what they're looking for, a home, an investment, a budget, you know, what it must have, what it must not have, you know, and when it comes to investment, there's a lot of advice around, you know, the two different markets or the one region over another and why and the data and the research behind
asset
all that.
Class, location, all of the above.
You know, due diligence, flood mapping, bushfire, you know, all those checks that you would do on it. That's because you're acting in the best interest of the buyer.
And a real estate agent, on the other hand, acts in the best interest of the seller.
Correct, yeah. And they're generally typically selling either investment property or their home, so there's certain criteria that a good sales agent meets to act in the best interest of the vendor. And then, the buyer's agency is obviously the buyer.
Now, for people that might be new to the world of property, it has been a debate for a long time because a lot of people have tried to dual hat this and try and be, everything to everyone and support the vendor and support the buyer. But if you're a buyer's agent and you're acting in the best interest of the buyer, that means you want to get it a little bit cheaper. If you're acting in the best interest of the seller as the vendor as a real estate agent, you want to get the highest price possible. You can't necessarily do both. So what you have here with a lot of these dodgy property groups that will have that undisclosed commission, they are not working in your best interest.
Correct. And it's generally undisclosed. And a lot of them will say, no, we disclose it through some form of, you don't have to pay us because we get the developer to pay, but they don't disclose how much. And a lot of buyers or consumers that engage with these property groups don't actually know that they're still paying that fee. It's just factored into the build price or the sale price. That's right. And generally, it's a fee that's factored in that you don't know. And we know just through industry knowledge that most of the commissions are $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for house land, or off the plan purchases and things like that. So you're definitely paying for it. It's funny, through the evolving of this, property group style businesses and stuff, a lot of them would engage a client and then they would say, we'll find the property for you, we'll help build it, we'll manage the build process. And it was a bit alarming that the consumer was sitting there saying, well, you do all this, but how do you get paid? And their conversions were quite low from the amount of people who sat in front to who actually proceeded and brought. Then they actually started introducing a fee for an appointment or a $4,500, $10,000 fee to engage us as a property group. And then all of a sudden conversions went higher because then they didn't have to handle the objection or the question of how do you get paid. So even though there might be a fee to join one of these groups, they're still taking this, undisclosed commission from the developer, in the vicinity of $40,000 to $60,000.
Yeah, and this is the benefit of. Firstly, that $40,000, $50,000 figure is mind-blowing, if that's your commission, because you are 100% right. That is factored into the sale price one way or another. Now, I don't know behind the scenes, how itemised it goes, but it's reasonable to say if you're getting a $40,000, $50,000 commission from it, it's probably $40,000, $50,000 more than the actual value of it, right? Because
100%.
Someone is literally getting a fee for having sold this to you. And it gives me a great appreciation for BAs because, and I've always backed people using buyer's agents, even if you're a first-time home buyer and you just want to know hand on heart that you're making a good owner-occupier purchase or whether you're rent vesting and you don't know that the town or the city you're going into. I've always been a big advocate of BAs because firstly, and I know this is something that you and I have spoken about on a lot of podcasts, Kane, is more often than not, you're getting some pretty Gucci off-market deals. So you're already maybe getting it $10,000 cheaper. Which, you're already recouping a pretty big chunk of the buyer's agent fee. But on top of that, you got the clarity of mind to say, okay, my BA, you in this example with Discover Buyers Agents, you've gone through 20,000 postcodes or whatever there are in Australia. You whittled it down to the top 5. You've married up these top 5 postcodes with your client. Here you go. Here's a house that we can say hand on heart is going to do a good job.
That's right. And you're filtering down and you're looking, like you said, through 15, 17, 20,000 suburbs and you're finding a market that's potentially going to grow and it's in a good position of its cycle. Whereas, these property groups, they're generally saying, where can I get stock and who's going to pay me to sell it? And that's what I'm going to go sell to you. So they don't actually pick their regions or their suburbs based on market cycles and growth metrics. They pick their regions and markets based on who's going to pay me if I sell this for them. Being the developer and how much can I get paid.
So they're basically just salespeople.
Essentially, that's what they're doing is selling house and land packages, isn't it?
Yeah. So they're just literally salespeople that are flogging it. Are there a lot of people that, and I've always been quite skeptical of it because I know I've spoken about this on a lot of podcasts. My wife and I were quite we're quite risk averse investors. And by risk averse, I've kind of erred away from like newer builds and everything. I understand that you do get like, and we'll talk about this later, but the quote unquote depreciation benefit.
Yeah.
But I've often been scared away from it, or the risk of you buy something, then the company collapses, then you're left with just a vacant plot of land or whatever.
Or half a frame.
So I've never actually really been involved in this. Are these the dodgy property groups? They're out there just flogging them. They're salespeople. Are they telling investors that, hey, this is a really good place to park your money?
That's right. And if you think about it, like a house on land is generally, let's use Stockland, who build master estates, so there could be 500, 2,000, and that's a lot of saturation of supply in an area for you to go buy an investment property. And as we know, supply is the enemy of growth. It's not going to grow in value if there's huge amounts of supply around it. So, when we filter and look through suburbs where we want to go buy Australia-wide, we want to see less than 1% building approval ratio for a suburb.
Yeah.
1%. If there's 10,000, we want to see less than 1% being built of additional or new supply in a region. And that's going to help, help growth. Whereas I had this one gentleman, he said, I've been talking to such and such a group and we're thinking of buying a house land package, and we looked up the suburb that he was looking at, 16% building approval ratio. It was huge.
Yeah.
So that's just going to put such a downward pressure on your growth over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
100%, because in the next 12 months there's going to be another 500 new places.
Yeah.
It's supply and demand.
And exactly. So, and you've paid an inflated price because you've got $40,000 or $60,000 worth of commission squeezed into it.
Yeah.
In a market that's saturated in supply. So you're going to be underwater for a good part of 10 years, So it just you really have to look at the area and get a good understanding of, and look at, you dramatise the example and say oceanfront land in Sydney. It's just landlocked. There is none, right? So, you most
it's finite.
typically,
it's
and even
resource.
if we just say it's not, that's right, finite. So it's limited supply. So there is none. Versus say go out west in Sydney, as far west as there is, and there's acres and acres of land, and that's where developers will buy and build, where they'll put new house and land packages. So there's a huge supply versus oceanfront or eastern suburbs of Sydney. There is no new supply at all. So the only way is to buy a house, knock it down, and build something new there. Right? And if we look at a knock down and rebuild, right? So even if we take away like the eastern suburbs of Sydney versus the west, and we say, think of an area that's just fully built out and there's no new land supply, and you get a property that's almost a knockdown rebuild, like this decrepit old house. You might have 600, 700, 800 square metres of land, and this house that's ready to fall down. Of $1 million budget, I'd say 80, 90% of that budget is allocated to the land value and very minimal budget allocated to the house value.
Yeah.
Versus a house and land package that is going to be far west and south of Sydney. It might be these days they're 300, 350 square metres of land, and it might be 600,000, 700,000 for the land and 300,000, 400,000 for the house. So in the first example, 90% of your budget's going to the land. The depreciation value in the house is what loses value, right? Versus the other option where 70% of your budget is going to the house component that we know depreciates. It's factual, and the ATO give you depreciation as a tax deduction, and a very small portion is allocated to the actual land that increases in value. So when you look at it from the actual asset selection as well, it just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't add up. And for our listeners, do go back and listen to our last podcast where Kane and I, we went through, I think it was the top 12 bases, defence bases across Australia.
Yes.
And you use these factors to say, hey, is this a good investment or not? And you went through all those data points, including the supply aspect, which is, there are going to be towns out there. I mean, let's pluck a town like Townsville, right? You've got a constrained population, as in you don't have thousands and thousands and thousands of tradies and builders like you would in Sydney or Melbourne, right?
Yeah.
So I don't have the data in front of me, but your supply might be a little bit slower in towns like that versus if you're in southwest Sydney. And I don't know when the last time you went to Holsworthy was, but when you go down that kind of M5 and you go past Holsworthy and you go past Campbelltown and you're going through the Southern Highlands, it's just everything. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands of new suburbs coming on board, especially around like Camden, like Oran Park and stuff. There's no scarcity. And as with the new airport coming on, thousands of new places.
Huge. And like you say, the airport coming on, they're just going to build more and more and more. So it's just a saturation of supply. And then run the numbers. Like, I don't know what a house and land package is worth out there, but let's call it 1.5. Work out how much of that is actual house content value and how much is land content value. And then just compare it to, somewhere in the suburb or, in a fully built out suburb. Because ultimately the land is what goes up in value that you want more of your budget allocated to. And that's the other thing. You can always add value. So you can buy something in the Sydney suburbs that's fully built out with no new supply, renovate the house, knock it down and build a new one. You're adding value to that, whereas you can't really add value to a house and land package that already exists,
Yeah, it's already there. And I suppose it is, I was touching on before about being risk averse, but looking at it from that risk perspective, it's actually not, if you've built in that 40, 50K commission and, life happens, someone gets sick, you lose your job, whatever the eventuality is, there is a huge risk that your resale price is not actually what you paid for it.
Talk to a lot of these groups sold house land packages in like the northern end of the Gold Coast through 2000, 2005, 10, even 15. And ask anyone that brought there in those years that their head was underwater for 10 or 15 years.
What do you mean?
As in they couldn't sell it for, they had to, it was post-COVID boom on the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
They finally got back up to their break even and could sell and get out. But, buying 2005, 10, they just did nothing and they were like on the market for less than what the investors in that paid.
That's insane.
And it's that saturation of supply that hampers price.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
but I'm glad you actually brought up that last episode because we're going to release buy, hold, sell report of the 13 most populated regions around Australia for the defence personnel. So if you're posting from one locality to another, you'll generally have some really good guidance in that report on the data behind each region, which is going to help you make a decision on what you can do with any property that you've either got or you're thinking about. So keep an eye out for that. We might even make it an annual report that we do.
Now, is it common that you see a lot of people in defence getting sold to by these salespeople?
No, probably no more or less than the general public, I guess. There's just a lot of these groups out there doing it because, it's quite attractive, isn't it, to get such a commission for selling one house and land package.
I did hear someone, we did have a guest come on the podcast, and to your point earlier about the conferences that people used to go to where they would spruik a specific suburb, but they had already pre-bought a bunch in that suburb to kind of artificially create that demand. Are we seeing similar levels of
just use the data? The data always tells the picture about the supply. If it's saturated supply, it will tell you the stock on market. Just go to the data behind that suburb and it's very hard to argue with. But generally they do flock together as well. So they'll buy in very common areas together. And what you find is all these property groups buying in one area and they're typically buying for a lot of investors. So when it's built, there's a lot of stock on the market that's vacant. So you can be sitting there with your property or your new investment 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months even vacant because there's so many being released as they're completed. So again, it's that saturation of new rentals. And if we go into I don't want to harp on about it, but the data behind, we can actually look at the percentage a suburb has of owner occupiers versus renters. And when we're buying an investment, we don't want any more than 20% 40% renters in one suburb.
Why is that?
Because people are committing to a mortgage. As we know, about 1/3 is a mortgaged owner occupier. Another third is an owner occupier unencumbered, and 1/3 is about investment properties. So we want to be in a suburb that's got at least 60% own occupiers because it's showing desirability to live there and people are
People want
committing.
to be there.
That's right.
Yep.
And own occupiers are what drive prices higher.
Yep.
So the more in one suburb and the less rental, the more desirable it is for our rental, that people will live there and will have shorter vacancies and less stock to compete with when it is vacant. And just in all a much more desirable, better quality suburb. Whereas if we go out in a lot of these newer estates, there's that saturation of supply that we know about, but a lot of rental properties being purchased for investors. So there's going to be more stock to compete with. So we're going to have longer vacancies when our tenant moves out.
So circling off on the house and land packages, it is evidence of working with your A team, your good buyer's agent, a good broker, and also I love my broker. So this isn't my personal broker if he's listening, but you also treat it skeptical, right? With the commission. What I always say to people is, whenever you get pitched the interest only loans, you have to understand why. Yeah. Now there are going to be people. Obviously, there are reasons why you have interest only, depending on where you are in your journey. If you're looking for quick capital growth and you just want to get in and out and you don't really have the serviceability in the first 2 years to pay off the principal as well, yeah, of course, there are always reasons you would do it. But you treat it skeptically and say, well, okay, I've seen brokers who kind of push the interest only because they're going to get better commission for themselves over the long run, especially when for some people the interest only might not be what they need. You have the skeptical glasses on that. You've got the skeptical glasses on the house land package. There's a reason that they're selling it. There's a reason that they need a salesperson for it rather than just listing it on realestate.com.au.
If the demand was there in that region, that'd all be sold.
100%. Yeah. So it does give you good reason as to why you should be working with BAs and an A team to help you on your property journey. How's Discover going at the moment?
Yeah, very good. We're getting more and more people reach out to us. We had this one fella he had purchased in Perth in 2021.
Yeah, nice. Good time to do it.
And he openly admitted it. It was a bit of a fluke. It was just the posting that took him there, and he purchased when he got there. But the broker said, "Oh, don't worry about Dohas. I'll come get you a cheaper rate over here." And he, took that advice for whatever reason.
How many times do we need to say it, Kane? Yeah. This was 4 years before the podcast, but I've heard this. Yeah, maybe it's one of those things because we have this podcast now that I'm a little bit more attuned to it and I hear it more.
Yeah.
But so many people say that exact same thing of, well, I don't need it because, I shaved off 0.5% elsewhere. It's like, mate, it's like $900 a month.
Yeah.
0.5% is like,
I think we worked it out. It's going to be closer to 2%.
Yeah. You need a 2% difference in the rate.
Find me a broker that can do that in a like-for-like scenario.
Yeah. Well, your interest would probably be lower than the Reserve Bank's interest rate at that point, right?
That's right. So, but luckily, 21 Perth, he's done well. He's pretty much essentially doubled. I think he had a bank val just shy of 900.
And purchase price of?
I was in low fours, 420. So he's essentially doubled, since that 2021 posting or whatnot.
Yep.
But he's now getting posted to Townsville. So we're talking through that and we said, well, how about we potentially buy in Townsville, use equity from Property One, purchase in Townsville, get Doe Housing at the full whack on Tier 3.
Yep.
So then he's getting his $11.50 a month or thereabouts. And he's maximising the full, because even if he did have Doe House on that property in Perth, when he purchased it for $420, at 80% his loan's in the 300s.
Yep.
He's not going to get his full entitlement.
It would be the lower tier.
His debt's not big enough to get the higher, even though his service has done 10 years, his the debt on that loan is not big enough to get the full whack of his entitlement.
Even though it's gone up 100%.
Well, it's based on the loan, because the way that the actual
value,
subsidy is worked out is a percentage of the interest of the debt.
Yeah, well, of course.
So if your loan's not big enough, your entitlement might be, if you max it out, like $1,100 a month.
Yeah.
But if you've got a huge deposit or whatnot, and your loan's just not big enough, you don't get that full entitlement of the subsidy.
It makes sense
even though you qualify for it.
If he's put down 20% on 420, he'd be looking in the mid 300s for. And
I think the loan balance for Tier 3
probably higher
in the sevens. So, but that's good because now it's presented an opportunity that you can go to Townsville, buy maximise his full entitlement of DOHAS on that property, and he's still got enough equity left over to then buy a third property in a new region, and we'll strategically pick that location where he's never to get posted, so it's not going to impact rent assistance in the future if he goes there.
Yep.
But it's also pick Australia-wide. It's free choice of everywhere in Australia where we're going to go and buy to add to the portfolio.
Okay, so that's opened up a few questions. So bought in Perth for 20, now worth 890, the most recent val. He's going to draw the equity from that home. He's going to take money out of that home to buy more. But
And
he's
that
going to keep
equity
it.
is going to be the deposit for property number 2 that he'll buy in Townsville as an own occupier.
Yep.
He'll go to one of the 3 DOHAS suppliers with that deposit. So we would pull out 400 or thereabouts, 300, 400. Use half of it as a deposit for a new place in Townsville and you get the full DOHAS amount, because there'll be a full 80% of ballpark 800 or 900 purchase price.
Yep.
He's been in for long enough to qualify for Tier 3.
Yep.
He'll get his full Tier 3 subsidy on that property in Townsville when he gets posted there.
So he'll keep it. He won't sell the Perth place?
Keep the Perth place, it's still in the portfolio, so we'll retain it, purchase in Townsville, get full DOHAS, and then in the future, when he gets posted away from Townsville, he can go to a new locality, get rent assistance, and then he's essentially employed that supercharged rent vesting strategy we did an episode on a few months back. He's getting full tier DOHAS. He can move out and then go get rent assistance when he gets posted away, but he has to live in it while he's posted to that region. And in the meantime, he's got enough equity in the Perth property where we can then go take another 20% and buy as an investment somewhere else.
So you're going to buy within the next couple of months?
Two
for your client. Talk to me about this, because I'm going to guess there are going to be a lot of people listening to this podcast that probably have a lot of lazy equity sitting in owner-occupiers, or maybe they've been posted around and they've got an investment property sitting somewhere. Talk to us through the logic of taking equity out of your home or out of your house to reinvest it elsewhere.
I think the first step is having a good broker on your side that also understands what's the long-term goals that you're trying to achieve. If you go to your typical owner-occupier style broker and all they do is own occupiers in their local region, they're very valuable for those people. But if you're wanting to build 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 properties, the broker's key to that relationship. So one, know what they specialise in, who you're talking to. But then the first step to release that equity that you mentioned is about getting a bank valuation. So then you know roughly how much equity you've got to play with. Then once we've got that, let's round some numbers up here to make it easy. But let's say his loan is 400 on the Perth property, and let's say it's worth $1 million. Now we get a bank val, 1 million on the nose, but then we know we can go to 80% of that million, so we can go to up to 800,000. So, and his loan of 400, we've got 400 to play with
that you can take out. And that you can put to another deposit, or you can.
So we could essentially say 200,000 for a deposit on a property, and then 200,000 for another deposit on another property. And buy 2 $1 million properties. Not suggesting that's what we do, but just for the ease of numbers. And then they've purchased another $2 million of real estate for their portfolio. Obviously, they're still going to meet the cash flow and borrowing capacity requirements.
We're assuming that this person is a lawyer or a banker or something.
Yeah, or doing well. And, typically it's rare that people are in a situation where they're going to go buy 3 straight up or bang, bang, bang. People will slowly build their portfolio over time. But again, circling back to the start, it's about building that strategy early and having that right team. So and the broker is critical on that team because they're the gatekeeper to the debt. And then understanding how we're going to pull the equity out. And sometimes we're not just going to pull it all out of one property like we're talking about here. It might be buying a good region that's moving and release some of that equity 6-12 months down the track.
You were a broker, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is to our listeners who might be kind of newer on their property journey, like obviously we've got so many different people that listen to this. Some people are new, trying to work out even how to buy an owner-occupier all the way through to seasoned investors. I think it's reasonable to say, Kane, a good place to start with this is don't necessarily go to a chain of mortgage brokers.
Yeah.
Find someone that has done it find someone that has skin in the game.
Yep.
Find someone like, not that you're doing the mortgage broker stuff anymore, but you had a vested interest in property and you took your clients on your journey with you,
Yes,
which is exactly what you're doing now. So shop around for your broker to help you.
And reach out, like, just for clarity for the audience. No, I'm not writing loans or a broker at the moment, but I know many brokers. We know ones that specialise in DOHAS. We know ones like myself have a decent portfolio, so they've been on the journey themselves and they can take their clients on those journeys. So definitely reach out and we can connect you with the right people. But yeah, having that broker that's sort of clued up and knowledged on building that portfolio is, because there's certain lenders that you'll go to first.
Yep.
And there's certain lenders that you'll say.
Well, especially if you're using DOHAS as well.
100%.
Yes.
And DOHAS is just that extra layer of complexity to the scenario about releasing equity and getting the DOHAS loan and then how we're going to move into the second. Or, DOHAS is commonly not even the first purchase that people make.
Yep.
So, again, it's just strategizing the debt side of it, and then also strategizing what you purchase, because that can also impact it. If you buy somewhere that's saturated with supply, that's not in the right stage of its cycle, and it doesn't grow in value, that can really hold you back, and that opportunity cost can be very detrimental to the portfolio growth.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I hate when people say, this isn't you, this is, by the way, because I hear how that came out. One thing I don't like is sometimes when you listen to property podcasts and they go into this like, yeah, we did it and you can do it too mentality, save, don't have your lattes, don't have your avo toasts. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of young people in defence or emergency services that are listening to this, and you might be posted to Holsworthy, you're 1 or 2 years in and you're looking at the houses around you going for $2 million, you're like, ugh, okay, like I don't even know where to start. But I'm going to break my own rule and say, actually, you can do it too.
Yes.
You can do it too, which is exactly the process that we've gone through with this podcast series, which is tactically buying in areas, partnering with the right people that can find you those growth areas, and it might not be in an area you're familiar with. It might not be in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne or the street that you grew up in. It's not necessarily going to be that blue chip area. It's a starter place and the rent vesting aspect. So do go back, if you're listening, go back to our episode on rent vesting. But on that note, it's quite amazing, admirable, and I think there's a lot to learn about this person here that they're going to buy 2 properties this year with $200,000 down on each.
Yep.
How does he go about the serviceability of that? I'm going to guess they're going to be negatively geared. How negatively geared are we looking? How can he afford it?
Well, obviously, once they move out of the Perth property, that's going to be pretty close to positive once the rent on that, because the debt's so small. So he's done well there, and that's made things easier. The second one is going to be on DOHAS, so they're going to receive that $1,100 per month.
It's gone up to $1,100.
11 on top tier, it's about $1,155 from memory.
I thought it was the 900s. I've been
No,
seeing
so the
900s.
middle tier 2 was $866 last I checked, and tier 1 was like $500. And
wow.
So but that would also be impacted by the recent interest rate change.
Yes.
That. So those figures aren't correct as of today, but that would be ballpark in the right vicinity.
Yep.
So he's going to get, first one's positive or thereabouts, neutral, let's call it. Second one's got DOHAS and its own occupier. So really, he's only, and this is about staggering your purchases and that. So he's about to go buy 2 straight up, but he's had the first one coming up to 4 years. And he's just done well on that first one that's allowed him to accumulate or purchase 2 fairly quick. But you'll generally go through somewhat of an accumulation period and then a consolidation where you're building equity and cash flow, and then you can and
then you can retire and you can buy a jet ski.
Yeah.
That's when you can do it. Though pulling out the equity in the Perth place, ideally your first property is then geared for growth. If you're rent vesting, you want to have an asset which is going to gain really big, so you can leverage that in the future. How does that process work if you're rent investing?
So it's essentially a similar. So again, if we use this example, when he goes to Townsville, let's say he doesn't buy in Townsville to get DOHAS, and he lives in service accommodation, whether that's rent assistance, living in accommodation, or DHA, and he's essentially renting, but it's subsidised rent, and then he can purchase an investment elsewhere. So this person is just using DOHAS because they've got tier 3 entitlement and they want to, build and improve cash flow as they build it. So they're going to utilise that DOHAS. And I'm a bit of a fan that using it earlier in the piece than later.
Yeah.
There's an argument to be made for early or late, and you can probably win the argument on either side of the fence.
Why would you not do it immediately?
Well, my argument for doing it immediately is, your net worth and your cash flow is probably the earlier to the workforce you are, or the lower rank you are, or the less savings you've got. HPAS and DOHAS are going to propel you forward faster because there's a bigger percentage of your overall net worth and cash flow position versus later in life. You might have a couple of properties, super's quite high, you've had a few promotions and your cash flow is better. It's a smaller percentage, so there's an argument to be made, don't save it, use it earlier. But because all of our entitlements as well, civilian, are geared towards buying a property that we live in. There's no grants really to help us buy an investment property. So, using them earlier to get started, get in the market and get something growing for you. The argument that's commonly made to saver or banker is if you serve, say, 10 years, use it when you know where your final locality is and where your forever home is, and then use it to buy there. I don't think that's bad advice. But
it's not bad, but it's probably not what I would go with.
It's not the fastest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like...
the risk is then you don't buy, say, the Perth place that just double in value if you wait 5-10 years. Because you would have accumulated a lot of equity in that place by holding it.
Yes.
So presumably that would be, I would err to doing it sooner.
And there's a good argument to be made. You need to know the market that you're getting posted because you've got to live in it. So it's got to be in an area like you mentioned, like if you're posted to Holsworthy or Garden Island, you might not be able to afford.
I don't think you're going to be able to afford it.
That's right.
Garden Island.
You're possibly not going to use it.
Yeah.
So you possibly save it and you fall into the category where I'll use it later in life.
Yeah.
Versus I've lived my whole life in Sydney, but I've just been posted to Townsville. I think that the consideration getting posted to Townsville, if you're going to use DOHAS, and it could be very early in your career, the consideration versus getting posted there in 2010 versus 2020 is very different. Because the growth that you'll get on the property that you buy and get DOHAS will far outweigh any rent assistance entitlement that you get.
You had some pretty bullish predictions on Townsville.
Oh, it's a good market.
Yeah. What was the prediction? Doubling?
Not doubling, double digit.
Double digit.
Oh, mate, if it was doubling from here.
I was going to say, I was like, bloody hell, why are we waiting? Double digit because the restructure.
So it's just it's still moving very strong. There's still strong demand there. There's very little supply. So depending on the suburb that you look at, but as a region, it's close to 1% a month. So over the next 12 months, it's still going to do well. Yeah,
which is pretty big. It's the return. It's a return on the entire price. So if you put down $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for your deposit, but the place is worth $500. The 10% return on that's still $50K. It's as big as your
and
deposit.
That's why we love property.
That's why we love
the
property.
Leverage.
Yeah,
it's very safe access there. Go to Commonwealth Bank or NAB and say, I just want to borrow 90% of the value of these shares. I've got 10 grand. I want to go buy 100 grand worth of shares.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, they'll laugh you out.
Yeah.
Now, Kane, inspirational chat. If anyone wants to reach out, how can they get in touch?
Just go to discoverbuyersagency.com.au, fill in the form, or just Kane at discoverbuyersagency.com.au, reach out. Always happy to have a chat around, DOHAS, HPAS, strategizing with postings. It's a daily conversation at the moment that we're having with people. Had a few people started reaching out via LinkedIn.
What about your Instagram? Your Instagram's going off.
Yeah. So... do reach out. Happy to have that chat. Talk about different suburbs areas and run through some data
Yeah, and then I'll take the complaints. If anyone is fiercely wedded to their house and land packages and is angry about what we've said, email me.
To Liam.
Yeah, liam.garman@momentummedia.com.au. And I'm more than happy to throw down via email. I can be a keyboard warrior if and when needed. And that is all we have time for today on the Defence Property Podcast. But until next time, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.